House Bill 1279, that's the House bill that made it illegal to sell or buy the PFAS containing foam next month. August 2021, and so if you need to buy it, you better buy it today or tomorrow, because after next month you're no longer able to buy it. But they also do a survey every 3 years. So of the 331 fire departments that airports and private industry that were surveyed, only 26 responded. I know my department didn't respond 3 years ago when they did the survey, but there just wasn't a whole lot of knowledge or interest in foam. And one of the things I found, and myself is in this category as well not right now, but a lot of people don't care about foam until you need it, and then it's a big issue, and you want to make sure you have the right product. House Bill 2019, this is a certification of registration program. And the way that I read it, I'm not a lawyer, but it permits the use and storage of the PFAS foam. And so we registered the foam that we have at our station, over 200 gallons of it, so that if we had to use it, we're in compliance with the House bill that passed. One of the best bills that passed is the Senate Bill 2018, and that collects the fee for the fuel transports, which funds the state buyback program. And that's why we're all excited to hear what David Donnie says about the state buyback program. And I think that's a lot of states are doing that. If we have a bad product and we need to replace it, it's really expensive. So the best thing the state can do is to help fund that replacement. And I know buying these totes, you're looking at several grand, almost 8 or 10 grand for a tote of foam. The other thing that we found on the state's website was green screen certified. So in their firefighting foams, they have a list of the PFAS-free foams that are there. And in that list, it's kind of overwhelming. There's 91 foams listed from 23 different companies. And how do you start to sift through that information? It's kind of a challenge. They also have green screen certified. And I did some looking into it. 2 of the foams that we tested were green screen certified. However, the company only looks at the health effects. It doesn't look at the effectiveness of the foam. I called and talked to him because one of my concerns was there's 5 foam companies that are on the technical review committee for green screen certified. They're also the foams that have been approved by green screen certified, and that just raised a little bit of a red flag for me. And so I called and talked to them and looked into their financials. They're funded by some left-leaning environmental groups, and they created a standard working with these foam companies to say it's healthy or not. One of the things I noted looking at micro blaze out is it has some adverse side effects listed on it. It can cause some serious skin irritation. It's bad to get in your eyes, and has a health hazard of 1 on the NFPA placard. The National Foam Universal Green has a health hazard of 2 on the NFPA placard, and it has the same eye precautions. And so I asked them, how do you have these foams that have adverse health effects but are green screen certified? And the answer to that was, well, we created our own standard for what is safe for people. And, I don't know what that means. They also have a long list of chemicals they look for. Most of them I can't even pronounce. And so I really don't know what the chemicals that they're looking for are. But the biggest thing for you guys to note is they don't test to see if the foam works. If the foam is brought and it passed the standards, then they'll list it, but it doesn't tell you if the foam works on a fire or not. The other resource about PFAS foam that I found is the Interstate Technology and Regulatory Council, and it's really good for government officials, and it gives a lot of information about PFAS and remediation of it. The one thing I found interesting in one of their webinars was if you're swapping out a PFAS fire truck or that has the PFAS in it, the Department of Defense recommends you rinse that foam tank 3 times before you fill it with new foam. But there are no standards on how to clean up from PFAS foam concentrate that's in your current rigs. And I think that's one of the things that might be a struggle, is how do we change out our foam without cross-contaminating the new foam that we have. We also did some Google research. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of NFPA 11, but that is the standard for low, medium, and high expansion foams. We looked into the January 2020 naval research with Jensen and Hughes and the risk logic study. All of these 3 different studies pointed out that these new fluorine-free foams require between 1.5 to 3 times the amount. Now that may not sound too bad, but if you need 10 totes to put out a fire by the calculation, now you might need 30 totes. And if each is 10 grand a piece, you're tripling your cost, and no fire department has the resources to have 3 times the amount of foam you need. The other thing that they noted is the foam densities for these fluorine-free foams needed to be a lot greater to be effective. And that's because we're taking out that surfactant, that PFAS, that creates that good vapor barrier, and now you're relying on that bubble technology to give you a good vapor suppression. The new fluorine-free foams rely on that foam blanket, and so the way you apply it is also really important. Some of these foams on their SDS sheet need a 7 to 10 expansion ratio in order to work. Now, I don't think that's going to work with our current equipment, and so depending on the foam you go with, you really have to look at your equipment and see if you get that expansion ratio. Now, it's kind of hard when you're flowing 1,000 gallons a minute to evaluate a 10 to 1 expansion ratio, because you have 10,000 gallons of volume of product, and verifying that, I think, is a challenge. And so one of the things that you need is an air aspirating nozzle, potentially, to get that high expansion ratio, but that can also really decrease the range that you get when you're applying it. Another thing that we found is some of these foams are kind of like hair gel. When we were pouring it out of the containers, it came out in clumps. And I seriously questioned whether those foams could be picked up by our normal foam adductors, just because they're so thick and so viscous. I have a separate PowerPoint that's on these thumb drives, which shows a video of some of the foams being poured into the water cans for our testing. It was pretty interesting to see how viscous some of these foams really are. Here's the list of the foams that we did. So we had about 15 foams that we tested. This is a list from 91. So we were a little overwhelmed trying to figure out what foams do we test. So we went through and picked out some of the bigger name brands. And so you can see Foam Tech, we have FOSCheck, Universal Green, Green Fire, Solberg, and T-Storm. So we went through all these, and one of the things that I did when I contacted these companies is I said, hey, we're looking to replace our AR-AFFF foam. Can you send us a replacement for it? And I got all these foams. Now, FOSCheck, they sent me a synthetic foam, but they also sent me a Class A foam because we were testing foams, and they're like, well, maybe we'll get more business, so we'll send you some more foam. But some of these companies sold their product as a replacement for the AR-AFFF. And this is one of the areas of deception that there is in the foam industry. All of them were UL listed, but there's two distinct differences between the UL listing. One is UL listed per NFPA 18, which is a wetting agent, and the other is per UL 162, which really evaluates the foam blanket and the burn back. And if you look at the testing for those, they use the same 50 square foot pan, but the way that it puts the fire out is completely different. The wetting agents don't evaluate a foam blanket or vapor suppression. They just see if it can put the fire out. UL 162 evaluates the foam blanket and how well it holds up against fire and direct flame impingement. And so from this list, we have the synthetic foams, which are the true replacements for AR-AFFF. We also got a lot of wetting agents and then encapsulator agents. And early on, if you do some research about the F500, I was really excited about it. It seemed like it had some good properties, but the amount that you need in order for it to be effective just isn't practical. So with that initial kind of somewhat deception of what foams will really work, we knew we had to really look at our testing criteria. And one of those was the expansion ratio. Is it even possible to get a good expansion ratio from these foams? Then we looked at the drain down time, and that was just seeing how long that foam blanket lasted. And then we tested the drain down time on top of fuels, because putting a foam blanket on the ground really doesn't tell you anything, but putting fuel underneath it will really give you that good indication of how well it performs. And then we took that information to a small scale test. As you can see up here, we lit the fuel on fire, and then we did the large scale test with Crestone Peak. So one of the things I had never really looked at expansion ratio and how you figure that out and make it scalable. We came up with the idea of putting a gallon of water in a water can and then putting the appropriate foam mixture and then putting it into a trash can and measure how much volume we got. So here's an example of that. We measured out with duct tape the expansion ratio, and this is Dawn dish soap. We had it around, and all the foams we tested, it was like, oh, you get good bubbles. And so we're like, well, what does Dawn give us? And so we tried a 3 and 6% of Dawn and we tested out, and it had a good foam blanket, but one of the differences is the density quickly evaporated with it. So we did this with every foam to test the expansion ratio and see how long it lasted, and we had really good results. Here's a list. I will note the DT means drain down time, and so we evaluated at 5, 10, and 15 minutes to see if there was any change to the foam over time. So at the top, I have 3.6, that's the percentage. So some of the foams were 3%, some of them were 6%. And one of the things we had to overcome is some institutional knowledge at my department. We were told once that microblaze out works really well on polar solvents if you put it at a 6%. We found out that not to be true. And so some of the initial foams that we tested, we were like, well, let's see what we get if we double it. And that also gives you an idea if you're doubling the foam, of how much you would need. And so if you're fighting a fire and you need 1.5 to 3 times the amount, if you're doubling the amount of foam, it'd give you a better foam blanket, but it also increases the cost. And it was just kind of a curious thing that we were looking at, how much difference. The FOS check is a 3x6. So it's a 3% ratio for hydrocarbons, a 6% for polar solvents. And so if you're using it on that, you have to use that higher percentage rate. But we used a water can, which is just a smooth bore nozzle, and we went against the side of the trash can and let it roll down into the trash cans. One of the things is we didn't have much of a budget, and the scalability of it was also an issue. Is if we flowed 100 gallons a minute, trying to test the expansion ratio would quickly create a huge mess when some of these foams may be potentially bad for the environment. And so we used the water can and trash cans to do all the tests on the small scale. And we treated every foam exactly the same. We stood 5 feet away from the trash can. We emptied the trash can completely into the side of the water can into the side of the trash can, and so that we had consistency across every foam. So for the small scale test, we wanted to see how well the foam blanket held up against fuel. The first thing we had to figure out is how much foam to do. There's a lot of demonstrations out there. So if I put 10 gallons of foam on top of a cup of fuel, of course, it's going to look really good and it'll impress you, and everyone will be like, man, that's a really good foam. But if you look at the math behind it, you're overwhelming it, and like you're not going to put that ratio on these fires. And so we went with NFPA 11. They have the application rate. You take the square foot of a tank times application rate, and then you get your gallons a minute. It's also the footprint methodology, which Williams Fire uses. And so we took the square foot of a turkey pan and converted that into gallons a minute. And you can see the math up there. We figured it for 4 cups of fuel, we need roughly 30 ounces of foam. And that was just a starting point because we had no idea how to do a really good test of the foam on top of fuel. And we figured starting with some NFPA standards was a good starting point. The caveat to that is the NFPA standard says you need that for 65 minutes. And so we took the gallons a minute, put it on the fuel over a short period of time, but we were really looking at the volume of foam that we put on it. And so we did several tests with the water can to figure out how to get 28 ounces of water out of a water can. We did several tests with a metronome, and for each of these tests, we actually used the metronome to give us that 3-second shot of foam out of the water can to keep it consistent. This is just an example of the universal green. So you can see this is right after we put the foam on. This test isn't perfect, and we're not scientists. You can see there's little gaps here where the turkey pan didn't fill everything. But right here, this is initially after we applied the foam. It looks like a really good foam blanket. But in 10 minutes, and I have all these pictures labeled so you can go in and look at them. 10 minutes, you can see the vapors starting to break through that foam blanket. And we did a minimum amount. We didn't put that 1.5 or 3 times the amount because we wanted to test everything exactly the same. Let me go to the next slide. Here's the result of that test. And so we did exactly the same for every one of these foams. We did 3 different fuels to represent the hazards in our district. So 110 racing fuel for the airport, and then we have Colorado National Speedway. We did gasoline because it's the most prevalent hydrocarbon in the area. Every car has it. And then we did E85 to test the alcohol resistiveness of these foams. There's a lot of information. So yes means the foam blanket was intact. No means it started to break apart. In the initial test, most of the foam struggled to last that 15 minutes. We got T-Storm a little bit later in the game because it was released, I think in April. When we did the same test, it lasted for 35 minutes on top of the fuels doing the same test. And something else I'll note, when we did this small scale test, my crew and I kind of developed some biases with foams that we were testing because we put a lot of effort into it. We had 4 or 5 people that weren't part of that initial testing there to kind of record the information and verify it. So we had Danny from Crestone Peak. He was there to observe it. We had Lieutenant Becker from Greeley Fire. We had Tron from the CPRN group. And then we had Doug Saba, our fire marshal. They weren't really part of the initial testing of the drain down time, looking at the foam on top of fuel. So they came into this kind of unbiased. I'm sure they had their own biases on or information on foam, but they didn't really have all the information and research that we did on the foam. And so they recorded all that information. And I wanted that to just make sure that our biases weren't brought into this small scale test. Because the intent was to use the small scale test and take it to a large scale test. But the results of the small scale test is we ignited the 4 cups, we let it burn for 30 seconds, and then we put the minimum amount of foam to put it out. Some of the foam struggled a little bit with the E85. And this was a very telling test because before we saw the foam blanket lasted for 10 minutes, at least on most of these foams. But as soon as we applied heat, that foam blanket rapidly disappeared. And in fact, most of them were gone within 1 minute after heating up that fuel. And so I know the only way we're applying foam in the field is if something's on fire, we need that vapor suppression. And so that was really telling, and it kind of validated some of the research that I'd read from NFPA 11, the Jensen and Hughes and Risklogic study, that you need a lot more foam to be effective. Yeah, we used the bare minimum, and then every foam had to burn back at 5 minutes. So we tried to relight it, and every foam blanket was gone except the T-Storm. And it held up for over 10 minutes on that test, on the fire test, when we lit it on fire. And so it performed better than any of the other tests. The other thing that we tested in the small scale test was toluene. We have Boulder Scientific in our district, and it's water reactive material. We knew that if that catches on fire, we don't know what's going to happen if we put water on it. And so we tested it. We did get a fireball with just straight water, which was kind of cool to see. And it's in the video. But when we applied foam with it, it went out right away. And so I feel confident that if we had a fire at Boulder Scientific and we used foam, we would be able to put that fire out. But if we use water, we'll make it burn down a lot quicker. So here's I guess a little teaser of the large scale test. And I know Danny just walked out, but when we started this, I had no idea that it would lead to this large scale test where we actually got to test the product on these tank batteries and put condensate in it. And it was a great experience to do that. We had a lot of help to get there. I know one of the things that I struggled with is figuring out the permits, like how do we light these fuels on fire without violating any EPA regulations or anything. And Dave Burns from Weld OEM was really helpful in that, figuring out all of those legalities. And it was great to have Fort Lupton and Brighton there as well, and Greeley. And we had the same research team. So Lieutenant Becker from Greeley, Danny from Crestone, Tron from the CPRN group. We had Hugh Kane there from Eaton Fire, and then Doug Saba from Mountain View. They were part of the research group to record all the information, because the test is only good if you can capture the information and be able to share it. The other thing that we did is we had a tick, and I have a video of it just showing the cooling of the tank, because it's kind of a cool information to see. From the small scale test, we picked 3 foams to take to the large scale test. One of them was micro blaze out. Mountain View currently has micro blaze out on all of our frontline engines, and we use it because it has the bioremediation effect, and it's supposed to be good for the environment. However, when you look at the SDS sheet, it has some warnings on there that it may cause an allergic skin reaction and can cause serious eye irritation. It's a health hazard 1, and its signal word is a warning. So caution, warning, danger. And this foam is green screen certified. And so that's one of the things that you have to research is if this foam is supposed to be green screen certified and healthier for us, why does it have these SDS warnings and a health hazard of 1? We wanted to see if it would work on these tank battery fires. The other foam we tested was T-Storm. It was the only synthetic foam that performed well in our small scale test. And so we wanted to see, okay, it did well on the small scale test. How does it do when we actually add a lot more fuel, a lot more heat to it? One of the precautions, though, is it can cause serious irritation to the eyes. And if you look at the SDS sheets of all these synthetic foams, they all have that warning on it. And even Microblaze Out does. National Foam, the FOS check, Solberg, all of them have that class 2A warning that it could cause damage to your eyes. It has health hazard 1, and its signal word is warning. The last foam we tested was NovaCool. I actually found NovaCool by watching a webinar from California talking about PFAS and the effects on the environment, and Seattle Fire uses it on all of their frontline engines. And so I did some research on it, and there's some promising information that it's effective at putting out some small tank battery fires. And so we wanted to see if it might be a good option as well. One of the advantages is health hazard 1, but it doesn't have a signal word, so not the caution, warning, danger. It's supposed to be a little bit more environmentally friendly. So we took these 3 foams to the large scale test, and here's a video of it. It's about 7 minutes long. I have some screenshots of the video so we can talk about the results, and then we'll also, if you guys have any questions during it, it should answer your questions. The one thing to note is someone that watched this video that there was a 2-inch nipple on the side of the tank, and that's where we stuck a rod in to light the fuel. That's also where we put the Pro Pack to put the fire out. One of the biggest struggles that I had, and I had to kind of argue and wrestle through this with some individuals who are here in this room who helped me out, is having an effective test. My intention was to use a hand line and show the effectiveness of a frontline engine, putting a tank battery out, because that's what we do. Well, through a lot of learning on my part and an effort to try to get this foam right, not be right, I learned that that's not necessarily the best way to do it. And if you do the NFPA 11 application rate for these small 10-foot diameter tanks, the application rate is 12.5 gallons a minute. Now, hopefully that causes you guys concern, because no one in here should fight a fire at 12.5 gallons a minute. It just seems stupid, right? But that's the NFPA standard for these tank batteries, or for tank fires. And it's really intended for these large area tanks. But I wanted to see if the math is right that we've been doing all along. How is that application method and all the math correct? And so we did 12.5 gallons a minute through a Pro Pack through the side of the tank, and that's what you'll see. All right. So hopefully you guys have some questions, thoughts, or comments on that test. And like I said in the beginning, I never thought we would have that opportunity, and I really appreciate all the effort that went into it. It just wasn't me. If it was up to me, we probably would have stopped long ago. But there's a lot of people and a lot of collaboration to make that happen, and especially with Crestone Peak donating the resources to make that happen, so that we can all get some really good information. One of the things that I really enjoyed about the test is that drone footage, and using the Crestone Peak Emergency Response Team. They have a really good drone that can give you really good footage for these fires if you need to recon them. And so that's a resource, and it's really good. I have over 40 gigs of hard drive data from that footage. But we'll talk a little bit about microblaze out. I have the bullet points so we can kind of discuss. When we were doing this test, I thought we did something wrong because of how long it took to put out. I was expecting 5 or 10 minutes, but when it took 24 minutes, we were all kind of wondering what did we do wrong, or what was happening. And so this is kind of the knock of the tank. I put that benchmark in where most of the fire was out. So the foam was starting to cover the tank. Right here is where this foam really struggled, is sealing that hot outside edge of the tank. And one of the things that I learned doing this is the big difference between wetting agents and synthetic foams is the actual foam and vapor suppression. Wetting agents might tell you that they give you vapor suppression or a lasting foam blanket, but they're not designed, and they've passed no test to verify that. And so when a sales guy tells you that wetting agents are going to give you a foam blanket, listen to what they're saying and don't believe them. On this test, the NovaCool guy told me that I need to put a 5-inch foam blanket and use an air aspirating nozzle to build up that foam to give you a good vapor suppression. And I listened to him, but then I didn't follow what he told me because I wanted to get a good test. And microblaze out is a wetting agent. It's not a synthetic foam. And this shows how that foam really struggled to put this tank out. And we were originally going to do a 5, 10, and 15-minute burn back. But during that time, we had a helicopter buzz the training site. So we figured flying a drone and lighting the tank off with a helicopter right above us probably wasn't a good idea. But the foam blanket, even putting that much foam on it, didn't last for 15 minutes. Here's a breakdown of it. And this here, I'll note, so we flowed 288 gallons of water through the Pro Pack to give us the finished foam product. I don't want to get down the rabbit hole of how much actual foam it is because you have to look at the expansion ratio and all that. But that's the amount of water and finished foam roughly that we got. It took 24 minutes to control the fire. The knockdown time was 2 minutes, so it seemed to knock it down pretty good. But we needed to cool the tank. There was no way we were going to put it out without cooling the tank beforehand, and that was kind of an unexpected occurrence in the test. But it was good. We learned some information. So the next test is T-Storm, and this is the synthetic foam that we tested, and as it performed well. One of the things I'll note, and right here is a little peninsula, and that's where the fire started when we relit it. And I think just with this debris, we really didn't know that it was in there before we started the test, and it actually proved effective. I think if there was no debris, it would have been hard to relight this foam or the fuel back on fire. But as we were applying it, you can see that the foam blanket slowly makes its way back here. And right here was the hardest part for it to put out because the foam's has a long ways to go. One of the things we noticed is this yellow sheen on top of the foam blanket. As you're applying it, it mixes with the product a little bit, and that's where the ghosting came from, right here. The good news is with that direct fire on top of this foam blanket, it held up. And as we were watching it, we didn't know exactly what would happen, but it shows the strength of this foam blanket. For 10 minutes, it burned along this edge and eventually broke down right here, which was one of the weaker areas of foam. But with that, it still maintained its integrity for a long period of time, and we only put the minimum amount of foam to put the fire out. And so we felt really good about this test. Right here, we thought that the whole tank was on fire because we were starting to see more growth of the fire and as it was developed, but you can see there's a very small portion of the tank that was actually on fire, and that's near the debris field. And we were able to put it out with Purple K. one of the reasons why we were able to put it out with Purple K is because we had that vapor suppression from that foam blanket, and it quickly knocked it out. One of the things that I learned in this process is Purple K is made up of sharp particles and can degrade the foam blanket. So you can shoot yourself in the foot if you have that last little edge that you're trying to put out with Purple K. You apply it and it can break down your foam blanket. You obviously don't want that to happen. And so we tested the T-Storm against the Purple K extinguishers on our foam truck. And after 10 to 15 minutes, we still had roughly 40% of the foam blanket remain. And so that foam did really well and held up. Here are the bullet points. So the tank was pretty hot before extinguishment. We had a really quick knockdown time, controlled the fire in 4 minutes. We flowed 48 gallons of water through the ProPack for the finished foam product. The foam blanket held up, and that's what we were trying to prove. Will this foam blanket hold up on a large scale test? We were able to use Purple K, which is really good to know. And then the foam blanket remained even with really hot fire in there. So NovaCool was the last foam that we tested, and it put the fire out the quickest. But one of the things that you have to be careful of, and the sales rep will tell you, is it gives you vapor suppression. Like I said earlier, the wetting agents don't give you vapor suppression, and you saw that right here. There is a complete foam blanket on top of that entire tank, yet it still flashed. And the only way I think that happens is if there's a lot of vapors escaping from that tank. And so there's a lot of deception in foam, in the selling of foam. And this is something important for us to know. If we have a wetting agent, sure, you can put the fire out, but you're not going to get lasting vapor suppression unless you put a ton on it. The other thing to note is we had what looked like a really nice foam blanket. It looked kind of thick from up here, but it quickly broke down. And this was at the 2-minute mark. That foam blanket started to rapidly break down, and there's a little drone footage of when we went to relight the tank at 5 minutes. There's only a small amount of white bubbles on top of that tank. So that really showed us too, with microblaze out and NovaCool on this large scale. Yes, they can put a fire out. It might take you a really long time, but the foam blanket doesn't last, and vapor suppression isn't there. Here's a quick breakdown of it. We used the least amount of water to put the fire out, but the foam blanket rapidly broke down. Here's just a little side-by-side comparison, because I think it makes it easier to compare them of what we had. And so you can see the knockdown time is on top, the controlled time, and then just a little note about the foam blanket. And then here's another little video that shows the cooling of the tank from one of our ticks that we had that I think is kind of neat. That was a cool video, I thought, because we don't usually see how the effects of cooling the tank, and just with a little bit of water, we're able to cool these tanks and help put that fire out. In doing all this research, I realized that foam is really only half of the story. One of the things we have to look at is our equipment and how we're putting these fires out. And this is how I envisioned the test going. We're be out there fighting it with a hand line, but learned that, the amount of water we'd be applying, we could essentially steam that fire out with a hand line, and it wouldn't be an effective test of the foam. The other thing that I have this picture up is, a lot of times these tank batteries are put out with a hand line, and is that the safest and best way to put them out? One of the things that I've learned with talking with a lot of individuals is the safety factor for these tanks for boil over, slosh over, or if there's other tanks and the tank were to, the lid were to pop off, is 10 times the tank diameter. And if most of these tanks are 10 to 12 feet in diameter, having a safety factor of 120 feet gives you that safety factor for boil over. Because sometimes we don't know what's in these tanks or how much water is in the tanks, and there is that possibility. I know in the past couple of years we've had 2 tank battery fires where the lids have blown off after the fact, and so we don't want to put anyone in harm's way. The other thing, these guys aren't in air packs, and this was from a picture in Texas, and I know historically speaking, Mountain View, when we've used our foam truck, guys have complained that, they're too close to the fire, so they had to put on their bunker gear just because the fire was hot and they're too close. And so I know we need to look at our equipment and the effective reach of that. But also, what is the best way to put these out? This is property that's already lost, so we shouldn't risk our lives being that close to a tank to put the fire out. So looking at our offensive, defensive strategies, and that's one of the biggest thing is creating that unified command with the operators. And if they can shut it down and try to make that problem better by isolating it, that's always the first and best step. And then they also have the drone, so you can go in and look, is that tank completely blown off, or do we have a partially torn lid, or what do we need to do so that no one's getting super close? And that's one of the reasons why I think the invite was sent out to everyone for the field day tomorrow, where we're trying to really look at our foam equipment and look at maybe some different options with our master stream devices. The other thing is the application rate. If we flow 1,000 gallons a minute on these tank batteries, we can overwhelm those berms pretty quickly with water. And so we don't want to necessarily flow 1,000 gallons a minute, but we want an effective amount to cool the tank and put the fire out. The other thing is foam supply. Are the foams compatible? And that's something that we're looking at another test later this week, is seeing if T-Storm and Universal Green are compatible together. Not the concentrate, but the finished foam product. And so we're going to do a test to see if you apply both of these foams at the same time, what happens. And my suspicion is that one of the foams will break down quicker than the other. Another thing is water supply. If you're flowing a lot of water, you need that water supply there, and we have a lot of rural areas in Weld County, and figuring that out is another component. And then our foam adductors. Do we have the right foam adductors for these new generation foams, and do our nozzles give us the effective expansion ratio and reach? One of the things that we're looking at on Friday is a new technology like self-expanding foam. It kind of comes prepackaged, so all you have to do is operate a lever, and it has a finished foam product, so you don't have to worry about water supply and adducting the foam. But I'm cautious. It's in a tank, and so it's expelled with CO2. I don't know if it will work well in Colorado with our wind because it doesn't have water to carry it to the source. But we're testing it. If you want some more information, come see me afterwards and I can tell you about it. But the biggest thing is looking at our resources here in Weld County. I know Mountain View, and I can only speak for Mountain View. I don't know if you guys test your foam trailers and trucks on a monthly basis or have good knowledge of it. But we really didn't have a good understanding of the reach that we get with our foam truck, or the best way to pump it. And that's why we're having that field day tomorrow, to really kind of look at that and hone in on it. And then also just for our general knowledge, if you call Mountain View, you know what reach we can get and where we need to position that apparatus. And then with all the foam trailers we have in Weld County, it's good to know how will they be used on some of these larger scale instances. And so if you guys aren't coming to Thursday, it should be a good class, and Williams will be teaching it. So I'm excited to get some learning from that. Have over 800 pounds of equipment that we're going to be testing out. And so it should be a good time. As I stand before you, there's a lot of people that stand behind me and have given me some good information and supported me along the way. And a lot of that has come from my station at Station 7, where I'm the company officer. These guys did a lot of work over the past year and a half looking at the expansion ratio and really testing a lot of these foams. And even on the small scale test, the collaboration within the CPRN group with Greeley, with Danny and Crestone Peak, and then just being able to talk to people. I've been able to talk to Last Fire, who's helped done the NFPA 11 standard, and got some information from them. I've talked a lot with Williams Fire, and I say I kind of had to argue some things because I had wrong perceptions on things, but it's good to try to share the information and collaborate with other people. I have all the research information, the videos, the 2 PowerPoints for you guys to review and take. If we run out of them, I also have it all saved on a OneDrive, and you just give me your email, I'll send it to you. Listen to what I've said, but also verify it through the pictures I've taken and the research I've done, because there's a lot of misconceptions and misleading information out there about foam. And we found that out, like the difference between synthetic foams and wetting agents. Like foam is foam, and if you get a bubble, you have a foam blanket and you have vapor suppression. Found out that's not true.